Hi, everyone, and welcome to ThatOneSecGuy's podcast, your one stop solution to be able to gain insights about latest trends in cybersecurity. Friends, today we're going to be talking about something that almost everyone has faced at least some point in their life. It's phishing and email security in general. And I have a very good friend of mine to take you through real world examples of how phishing has really been a very big attack vector in the landscape of cybersecurity, and what are the kind of countermeasures people have been developing to fight against phishing, and how hackers are getting their game better in order to make phishing more and more advanced. So, welcome to the show, Siddharth. How are you?
Hey, nice to get on here with you, man. It's been too long, honestly. But yeah,
Absolutely.
it's great that you're taking this initiative, and it's amazing. Always up for a conversation with you. So yeah, let's
Appreciate
go
it,
on.
Siddharth. And likewise, I think it's great to be able to come together and contribute to the community, right? And
Yeah,
also, audience, Siddharth and I go a long way. We have done multiple red teaming engagements in the past, and would I would always bet on Siddharth's ability to take down enterprises, and his specialization in using phishing as a mechanism to initial access into the organization. So yeah, he's one hell of a red teamer and someone to definitely watch out for in the red teaming space. And I think that's also something that really gives you the edge, is that before getting into security, you sort of come from a developer background, which kind of is a make and break concept, right? Because you understood how to make things
yeah,
when you were doing the development, and now you are all set to break things
absolutely.
as well.
No, absolutely. I strongly recommend people getting into security to take that path because I mean, even with you, right? Because I think that is something we had in common, where
Yes.
before getting into security, we spent a lot of years just working on our development skills. I was doing a lot of open source contributions. Then, I mean, during undergrad, I mean, machine learning, something that was piqued my interest, so I decided to research in that. And only when I started working at UI with you, I mean, that's where we were able to hone a lot of these skills. Like when like scripting comes naturally to
Yep.
people who've been developing software, right?
Absolutely.
And I think one great insight is when you know how a particular tech stack works, when you're building things out, those little minor details, maybe endpoints here and there that are something that when you're looking from an attacker's point of view, you know how to,
Yes.
okay, maybe this is something I could exploit, maybe,
Yep.
right? So
Yep.
it's just that insight comes in once you're like hard into development. So yeah, that's
Agreed. Agreed.
yeah, yeah,
Lovely. So, thanks, Siddharth. And I think let's get started on the email security, which is today's topic of the podcast, right? To set a general context for the wider audience, maybe let's set the stage by explaining what email phishing really is and what different sorts of email phishing types occur in the market today, right? Like there is spear phishing, whale phishing, etc. And then we can jump into how email spoofing is being used by attackers in the cybersecurity landscape.
yeah. Sounds good. So I mean, let's talk about the different classes of phishing, right? Like as you mentioned, there's multiple categories of phishing attacks. So the number one is email phishing, which is something I'm sure everyone is aware about. And
Hmm.
there are ways in which it is used, right? So let's first talk about mass phishing, which is an attacker decides to send a bulk of these phishing emails to an order of 10,000 or even more users, right? And the aim here is simple. They're trying to get credentials. And
Hmm.
even if there's maybe 2% success rate, that's still 200 credentials with the attacker, right? So
Hmm.
that's how mass phishing works. Like they don't, the attacker doesn't really care about efficiency. It's
Hmm.
just about getting the numbers out. So even at a low percentage of success, you still have a lot of credentials, right?
Right.
Then you move on to something that's more targeted, and that is certainly a lot more effective in whether it's a red team engagement or a real world attack, this is spear phishing, right? So you're doing a lot of research before you even come up with that first email about
Hmm.
who you're targeting. So now, how I was talking about mass phishing, where you're sending out to 10,000 people, here maybe you're sending it out to only 20 people, right? You might be
Hmm.
sending it out to 20 odd folks. And the key here is you will probably have enough intel on these people that allow you to craft the content of the email in such a way that it is something that is extremely believable. When a user
Hmm.
reads that email, they're like, okay, that this is something only the person who's supposed to know this, right? Maybe it's coming from the
Right.
HR about salary, perhaps,
Right.
right? So that is something that is extremely believable,
Friend
and
from
Hmm.
guy
people.
is
Oh,
left
I'm
with
sorry about
phone.
that.
That's fine.
Yeah, that was just a glitch
Is
there.
that your
But
Alexa?
yeah, that was the Alexa sort of sitting right here.
Okay. Okay.
But
So in
anyway,
spear
right.
phishing, you are basically adding context to the
Yeah,
victim.
you're adding a lot of context for the user so that it's that much more believable for that user to click on a link or maybe download something. So you're sort of adding a bit of a factor of trust, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Then you move on to whale phishing, which is also referenced as whaling, which
Hmm.
is a more sophisticated uh, version of spear phishing, I'd say, right? So
Okay.
in that, you're targeting people with high level of authorization within an organization. So by that, I
Hmm.
mean C-suite level folks. You're trying to get, let's say you've got the CEO, CFO, CTO, there's 4 or 5 people, but then let's say you set the context in a way where they are able to then relate to that email and then go on to click on something or download something, right? And by that I mean, and the more subtle thing here with whaling is that the job description of somebody at a C-suite level
Hmm.
requires them to talk to maybe a lot of people from external vendors, or maybe they're having a
Yes.
business deal with a certain third party or another peer company
Right.
or a competitor. So
Hmm.
that sort of makes them, like, a lot of our email systems will warn you if an email is coming from an external site or an external domain,
Absolutely.
but these mailboxes are used to something like that. So your eyes are sort of desensitized to such warnings, so you're that much more vulnerable to click such emails, right? So
Right.
it becomes a very different ball game in that case, right?
Okay.
So these are the three various classes within email phishing on how this
Hmm.
works. Then
Hmm.
there's more new age ways of getting what you need. Wishing is one of them.
Right.
Um, Phishing is, well, you're calling somebody. It's voice phishing. So you're
Right.
calling someone and you're pretending to be someone else and
Hmm.
trying to get information from them, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And then like off late, there's also been video phishing, which is you're
Hmm.
sort of
Yes. With the
trying to
advent of
get
AI,
somebody. Yeah, yeah. With the advent of AI, you have face swap features,
deep
Gen AI,
fakes.
deep fakes, all of that.
Yes.
That allows you to morph your face into somebody else. You can
Hmm.
also morph your voice into sounding
Yeah.
like someone else. And then that just becomes scary at that point. In fact,
Absolutely.
last year I was at DEF CON and we had there was this one session where we had a live demonstration of this, and it was beyond scary.
Hmm.
This person, he was impersonating, I think, Mark Zuckerberg and trying to talk like him, and
Hmm.
it was like you could, I mean, because it was last year, you could still tell it was AI, but you can already see, like, every year with the level of improvements we've had, it's
Hmm.
not too far away where it'll be very realistic. So
Absolutely.
that
Yeah.
that sums up all the different classes of phishing. I think I didn't talk about SMS phishing, which is, I would say, the least effective.
Yeah.
But also in the US, it's happens to be the most used because
Right.
my SMSs are like filled with,
Flooded.
every day I get these phishing messages all the time. So yeah,
Absolutely.
that's about all of the classes of phishing.
Right. So we spoke about bulk phishing, spear phishing, whale phishing, wishing and smishing. And I think
Yeah.
wishing and smishing are their own attack vectors, which do not
Yes.
include any
Yes.
email context. So
There's no email
let's
glitch.
Right. So we'll come to the email-based phishing vectors for today's topic, right? And like you said, actually, even video phishing and all of these things are very scary, right? With the impacts that are being created, like fake interviews, and recently there was a very big financial disruption that happened because a CEO of the company was posed as to be able to process a very big financial procurement bill. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, attackers are getting damn creative, and this is probably because of the lowered bar for entry with the advent of AI for the attackers as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that is certainly the case.
Lovely. So, Siddharth, now that we spoke about the different types of phishing, generally in red teaming engagements, whenever we are trying to exploit anything email related, our first maybe indication of something to go in that path would be open port 25, which would indicate
Yes.
that SMTP is running, right, or 487, or any of those
Yeah.
email ports. Now, first question I want to ask is, what kind of a role does SMTP play in the whole process of email delivery? And secondly, we use multiple records to be able to protect ourselves from email spoofing and email security in
Yes.
general, like DKIM, SPF, DMARC. So, what sort of role does that play? And is it really effective to be able to have those measures in place and be just, free from worry that, our email security is all good?
Right. Yeah. Well, let's talk about SMTP. Maybe we'll go over how it works, and then we can have a context about how the authentication mechanisms are important, right?
Hmm, hmm,
So with SMTP, like, it's, as it says, it's a simple mail transfer protocol, right? It allows mail servers to communicate with each other. That's all it does.
hmm,
So and in all the modern tech infrastructure that you see in every organization, you'll
hmm,
find that everyone uses SMTP for a mail transfer,
hmm.
and you can have a secure version of it where your messages are encrypted, so you can have a TLS encryption through
Right.
SMTPS, right? So so from a phishing point of view, it doesn't really matter as much what's happening on the network layer. It's more about the application layer for this context, right?
Hmm,
So let's say you've got an Outlook client or a G Suite client on top of the SMTP, and
hmm,
your organization has a mail server that handles all the incoming and outgoing mail flow.
hmm,
So now, let's say I'm this organization XYZ. I have a mail server mx.xyz.com that
hmm,
handles all of that. Now,
hmm.
let's say, like how you mentioned that let's say the SMTP is open, right? That's essentially saying that there's an open mail relay. What
Yes.
now? If there are no other mechanisms in place to authenticate users, what that means is that anybody in the world, if this infra is exposed to the internet,
Hmm,
anybody in the world can connect to that mail server, right?
hmm.
You can very easily connect to it through telnet, just specify the port number, and you have
Yes.
send an hello message, and then you have a session going, right?
Correct.
Once you do that, the issue here is that if there is no authentication, you can send emails through that mail server. So in this case, my mx.xyz.com mail server
Hmm.
is then uh, the attacker can then use my mail server to send emails to anybody, right?
Right.
And that is, there are like four uh, policies essentially, that it's either internal to external, internal to internal, external to internal, or external to external, right? So
Correct.
those are the ways in which you can communicate using this mailbox.
Hmm.
So the the DNS records that you mentioned, DKIM, SPF, and DMARC, play a huge role in protecting our mail infrastructure.
Okay.
So let's talk about each one, and then we can understand how it helps us authenticate. So
Okay.
let's start
Okay.
with SPF.
Hmm.
SPF records, if put very simply, what it does is it sort of whitelists the mail servers that can use our domain. So xyz.com is my domain. If
Hmm.
I have an SPF record and I've whitelisted particular mail servers that can use this, or any, I can provide IP ranges as well, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So once that whitelist is done, I'm essentially saying, if if it's essentially a policy at this point, it's
Yes,
just a
it's like
policy.
CSP, but for mail
Yeah,
servers.
that for mail server, it's just a
Hmm.
policy. So then,
Hmm.
uh, what happens is you can then, based on this policy, have alerts going, right? Because if there's an external person trying to access a mail server that somebody else is, and you're trying to send emails,
Hmm.
then your IP address would probably not be, or your domain wouldn't be in that database, right? So
Right.
you are not. I mean, again, just with an SPF record, it's not one solution for
Of
this, right?
course.
Like it
Yeah.
still allow you to do it. It's just that it's beyond a policy, so it'll flag it, right?
Right. Right.
So next comes DKIM, which
Hmm.
is more of an authentication mechanism and also guarantees integrity, right?
Okay.
So how
Okay.
it does that is it uses asymmetric cryptography where the sender is signing the message with the private key, and
Mm-hmm.
then whoever the recipient is can verify the identity with the public key of that person, right?
Right.
And the
Hmm.
public key can be saved, and so your domain, and in this case xyz.com, can have that domain listed in the DKIM. Okay,
Okay.
so essentially that the public
Hmm.
key is now stored on your DNS record that the whole world can query and find out. And
Okay.
once you have the public key, you can then verify the identity, right? So
Okay.
if you were trying to send the email and you don't have my private key, so then you're no longer able to authenticate. So that is DKIM along with SPF. Again, they're both policies, so this is where DMARC comes in. This is
Okay.
where DMARC is our mechanism that allows us to figure out what do I do if the policies are breached, right?
Hmm.
And there are
Hmm.
three major options. You can either, quarantine the email coming in, or
Okay.
you can reject it, or you
Mm-hmm.
can let it pass. Those are your three options. And then I mean, we can get into the details, but I think for this it's not needed. But yeah,
Right.
in short, that is what it would do.
These
And
three
once
options are provisioned because of DMARC.
yes,
Okay.
because of
Okay.
DMARC. DMARC
Okay.
allows you to set set the configuration essentially, and then you provide exactly
Got it.
what needs to be done, and then everything happens in the back end. Like once
Right.
these three are set, uh, you can have other rules to make sure these alerts are actionable in certain ways. So
Okay.
yeah, that
Okay.
that would certainly block out email spoofing. And
Hmm.
email spoofing is anybody in the world could send emails using my domain, right? And
Yes.
that is
Yes.
something you want to block out. And these DNS records help you do that.
Right, right. Okay. So, very interesting, I think. And thanks for explaining that how these three records play a very integral role in the email security landscape, right? So, even with these advent of these records, and on top of that, also there are multiple more measures at email security that's done, but still there are things that are not seeming to work, right? Because if
Yes.
it was an ideal world and things were working because of these configurations, then phishing wouldn't be an powerful attack vector. But
Right.
phishing, as we still know it, is one of the most powerful attack vectors even now. So
Yeah.
what are essentially driving these attack vectors still? Because I know that we are trying to do multiple different sort of impacts and techniques with phishing, like URL cloaking and website mimicking. So what are the other kind of techniques that are being leveraged by attackers who use phishing to
Right.
sort of bypass these security measures in place?
I mean, just now we were talking about email spoofing, which is one particular vulnerability that allows you to do phishing, right?
Hmm.
And in this case, the vulnerability is that anybody in the world can use my domain to send emails, right?
Right.
Which is a
Hmm.
huge problem.
Hmm.
And even with these mechanisms, let's say you block it out, the major attack vector doesn't happen to be email spoofing at all, right? In
Right.
this day and
Yes.
age, it's email spoofing, but it's not exactly the same. In this case, you don't. What attackers do is they try to buy domains that are
Hmm.
similar to the domain you have, right?
Right.
So let's talk about certain strategies that attackers use. So
Okay.
let's say I have a particular authentication page called
Hmm.
auth.xyz.com, right?
Okay.
what an attacker will do is, like, let's say he tried to email spoofing, and but my organization has all the records, all the DNS records we need in place, so he's not able to do that, right?
Hmm.
But now the other thing he can do is try to look for domains that look exactly like ours. So in
Similar.
this case, if it's similar. So in this case, let's say I have like I said, the subdomain is auth.xyz.com.
Mm-hmm.
I could try to look for something like authxyz.com, a domain, which
Okay.
is no
That's a
longer
separate domain altogether.
a separate domain. It's no longer
Yes.
xyz.com, right?
Yes.
But
Correct.
it looks similar, right?
Right. Right.
That is the key here. And
Right.
the moment this attacker owns that domain,
Hmm.
he can do anything he wants with it, right? It's no longer in your scope. So,
Correct.
but yes, like at the end of the day, emails coming from this domain will still be external emails,
Hmm.
but it's like the attacker then sort of uses a lot of techniques here. So in the one thing is, you can't really mark yourself as an internal domain,
Domain.
essentially, like a subdomain, right? You
Right.
can't have a whitelisted IP. You
Correct.
could if you had an open SMTP port,
Hmm.
and in that case, you're again using the internal domain. But here, the attacker has set up his own mail server
Hmm.
using the domain that he has,
Hmm.
and then he's sending the phishing emails in, which is
Hmm.
as far as the email policies and the filtering is concerned, it's just an email, right? Like I
Right.
can send an email to anybody from an
Hmm.
external email ID. That's what it is. That's why the mail comes in. But the filtering is done based on a lot of other factors.
Hmm.
So if it's a phishing email, it'll probably have a link, or
Hmm.
it'll have an attachment or something, right?
Hmm.
And based on that is what these filtering systems try to detect if it's a phishing email or not, right?
Okay.
So in my experience, I've a lot of social engineering engagements that I've done.
Yeah.
uh, Turns out there are multiple ways of doing this. However, the most efficient way, and this is about spear phishing, right? I'm talking about
Hmm.
spear phishing.
Hmm.
The most efficient way happens to be have everything custom made, right? So one strategy is you could use open source frameworks that allow you to have a high throughput on the number of emails you send out, and that is useful in I'd say gray box engagements where the your client wants you to send these phishing emails and
Hmm.
evaluate the employees, not
Right.
necessarily the
Right.
defense systems. They want to evaluate the employees. So
Correct.
in that
Hmm.
case, you can use one framework I've used is GoPhish, which has been quite useful for me.
Absolutely.
Then you can have your own mail relay. You can use postfix, have
Yes.
a self-hosted mail server,
Hmm.
and then have this infrastructure running under the domain that you've bought, right? Once
Okay.
you've done that, you can then now you essentially have a machine that can churn out a lot of emails, right?
Okay.
And this would allow you to do mass phishing.
Hmm.
But the issue comes when you're no longer it's no longer gray box. If it's completely black box, then
Hmm.
the company is evaluating their defenses as well, right?
Right. Right.
So
Right.
if that is the case, then doing this is not efficient because you will most certainly get blocked. If the company has decent defense systems in place,
Hmm.
more likely than not, you will get the emails will get blocked and
Hmm.
none of it will go through. So then what you do is you try to and the detection mechanisms, like with GoPhish, like there's a lot of parameters that GoPhish has
Hmm.
that it's quite easy to pick up on the recipient's end. So it's very easily flagged as malicious.
Okay, so
So
let me just pause for a second, right?
yeah,
So, step number one would be to use some sort of typo squatting or cyber squatting or just basic common sense and buy a domain that looks very
Yes.
similar to your victim's domain.
Yes.
Second step would be to set up your infrastructure for phishing, right? And this
Yes.
phishing infrastructure would contain the components that you've mentioned, like GoPhish is a great framework.
Yeah.
And essentially, for us to be able to deliver the mail using GoPhish, we need to have a mail relay setup, and which is where postfix comes into play, and that
Yes.
helps you relay the email once you have it set up for delivery. And also, you can, with the advent of maybe cloud VMs, right? You can set up all of this infrastructure on your Azure or your AWS,
Correct.
right?
Correct. Correct.
And multiple other configurations are then by default given in the cloud itself. So I understood till here. Let's continue from here.
Okay. Right. So yeah, once the infrastructure is ready and you want to, like, how I was talking about, if you're doing spear phishing, you don't necessarily want to use too many of these frameworks because it's easier to pick them up because they have certain signatures in the way they deliver messages that
Right.
defense systems are, like, it's a lot easier for them to pick it up, right? So then what you do is, like, again, you set up instances on the cloud and you try to customize all of these. And because you're doing spear phishing, you're probably sending emails to about 10, 20 people, right? So one strategy that I've seen a lot of success with is setting up if the client, and if you have the intel about your target's mails service, and you can do that quite easily through DNS. You can find out what service they're using. It could be G Suite. It usually is Outlook, but it can also be G Suite. And based on that, what you can do is you can register your now new bot domain, which is yours, and it sounds similar to theirs. You can register it as a company with Google or Microsoft and have your own sort of
G Suite or
G
Outlook.
Suite or Outlook setup going on. And
Right.
what that allows you to do is you get one problem it's solving is you have some form of validation, and the reputation is there. Like, you'll have all the DNS records. It'll be mostly TXT records pointing at Outlook's web servers or Google's email servers. That's how it's going to be, right? So
Right.
what that allows you to do is, at least for the first few emails, your emails are guaranteed to go through, right?
Okay.
It's
Okay.
not, it's never, the first email you send will always go through unless the content of your email is quite easy to categorize, right? And
Yeah.
this is where I would say G Suite differs from Outlook, where, because in my experience, it is much harder if your
To
target is
bypass
using
G
G
Suite.
Suite. It's much harder to bypass G Suite than it is with Outlook, because with Google, in fact, you know what? I'll actually bring up an email to you that I
Okay.
have used in the past, and we were able to harvest about 5 credentials in a spear phishing campaign.
Okay.
All right. So
Yep.
as you can see,
Thank
like,
you for
it's,
censoring the details.
yeah, I had to censor it, but obvious reasons. But
Right.
so it's a very simple email, as you can see, right? It's just a salary update email, and we've given a link to a particular SharePoint, or we're claiming to redirect you to a SharePoint. The idea is, the moment you click it, it'll take you to an authentication page for SharePoint, which will be a phishing page of ours, right?
Right.
So, and we're pretending to be HR, and we've sent this out, right? So
Hmm.
now, as you can see here, right, it's a very simple email. We've hyperlinked the link. It's not just pasted on there,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And it
Absolutely.
looks very professional, right?
Yeah.
And that is the key here. As simple your email is, the more likely it goes through, right?
And this is how we actually get salary updates from HRs,
And
right?
yeah, exactly. That's
Yeah.
exactly how you would get it. So
Yeah.
here, the challenge that we're trying to solve is not the user clicking on the link, but getting past the spam filter, right? And
Right.
but again, now I had brought the point about Outlook versus G Suite. So this particular email, right? Just this morning, I tried to send it and see what was happening, and it came through in Outlook. But when I
Okay.
sent it to my personal ID, from my, like, I sent an email to myself with this content, Google didn't let me do that,
Oh,
right?
wow.
Yeah, it didn't let me do that because it is, this particular email has already been flagged, like once the engagement was over, I remember it being flagged at the end of the engagement
Okay.
by Google. And
Hmm.
it clearly remembers. After that, it's just a signature check, right? If a particular
Yes.
email, if the hash matches, it's an immediate flag. So
Correct.
that's what it is, right? So
Yes.
if you're dealing with G Suite, you have to be a lot more careful in your mechanism of delivery. That
Okay.
becomes a bigger challenge, getting past the
Got it.
spam filter. But with Outlook, it's not necessarily the case. Again, that's only if the target organization doesn't have additional defense mechanisms in place, and they usually do,
Hmm.
right? So
Right.
that's about what the emails looks like. I can
Right.
also show you a sample phishing page, which
Mm-hmm.
is, this is really old. I pulled it out of God knows where, but I
Okay.
think it will be of a good insight to maybe bring it up.
So that's the website mimicking technique, right?
That's the website mimicking, yes.
And a lot of these times we use ADFS pages as our phishing.
Yeah. A lot of that. This is something very basic though. It's just a login page for Google and Microsoft. Let me just bring it up though.
Mm-hmm.
Let me know when you can see it. And this is just the front end,
Yes.
right? So this is what the front end of a Google sign-in would look like. And if this is for Microsoft, and this is
Oh, wow.
a very generic one, right?
Yes.
Now, a
Yes.
lot of companies will have ADFS portals, which will be specific to the company. Maybe it'll have its logo and maybe
Correct.
some background image.
And it's not very hard to mimic
It's
that
not
as well,
it's
right?
not very
Yeah.
hard to clone that, right?
Right. Right.
You can send a curl request, download a lot of the front end, as in a
Hmm.
lot of the images and a lot of the background stuff that's happening. It's all static content, right? This is
Correct.
entirely static right now. I
Yes.
have not attached any backend with this. So you can just put in something and then it'll take you to the next page and then you can submit credentials there. Right?
Okay. Okay. And these
So
credentials are then getting stored in your GoPhish
yeah, and then
infrastructure.
that goes to my database. I can store it wherever, right?
Right.
So
Right.
we and yeah, so my point was that it's relatively easy to do this now,
Hmm.
especially I'll give
Hmm.
you a progression. So when I started out and the first campaign that I had launched,
Hmm.
I was an intern, I think, right?
Okay.
And it took me a good month to
Uh-huh.
obviously I had to do a lot of research about, what works, what doesn't work.
Hmm.
But setting up the infrastructure and then actually experimenting with what gets flagged, what doesn't get flagged. A lot of domains I had burnt doing this,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
But over time and now, I have Ansible and Terraform scripts that do it for me. I honestly don't have to spend more than 45
Yes, and it
minutes
makes sense, right? I
making.
with the advent of IaaC into today's landscape, a lot
Yeah.
of the VM infrastructures, it's very easy, right? Even today,
Very
I don't
easy.
think anyone is setting their red team infrastructure manually as well anymore.
Yeah, it's and the fact that it's changed in the last 3-4 years so rapidly. Because I've seen just last year in the summer, I was doing a red team,
Hmm.
and and especially even with AI,
Hmm.
the throughput has improved so much because all the sysadmin work I can automate, right?
Right. Right.
All of
Yes.
that is automated. And then, in fact, this is something I've not yet implemented, but even for the phishing, the
Mm-hmm.
actual action of phishing, I
Mm-hmm.
believe the content creation, obviously AI can do, but you can
Hmm.
have a pipeline set up where, your
Yeah.
Ansible script spawns the infrastructure. And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
top of that, you have got GPT models pumping out content and then that's just being sent out.
Yes.
Honestly, I don't think I have to do anything anymore.
I'm
And
sure
which
there
is
are already projects out
yeah,
there which are
yeah,
integrating your Ansible scripts and your Terraform scripts with Copilot and all those things that
yeah.
are coming
I'm
out.
sure. I'm
So,
sure
yeah.
because in fact, malicious actors are probably already using it because in the last year, and this is a stat, right? The number of phishing emails going out, coming into. I'm sorry about the background noise,
That's
but
fine.
yeah, the number of emails being sent out has gone up by 1,000%, right?
Okay.
And
Hmm.
if you factor in the fact that 70% of the initial access that happens, out in the wild is through phishing, and the fact
Really?
that it's gone up by 70%,
7-0. Oh my
70,
God.
70% of all
Wow.
initial access happens
That's an
through phishing.
interesting stat.
And now, like in 2024, the number of phishing emails have gone up by 1000%. You can see that it is a very dangerous environment. And this is why it's really important right now, especially to focus on email security and, your defense mechanisms of, classifying what is phishing, what is not phishing. Because if you have your blue team, using their eyeballs to figure out what is
Hmm.
phishing and not, it's like you're always going to have that one person who submits the credentials, and, you're out in a frenzy, right? So
Correct.
that is always there. But
Right.
yeah, my point being, once you have all of this set up, and, with all of the new technology that we have, the the speed at which you can do this has gone down tremendously.
Hmm.
And B, I think, we talk about script kiddies using random scripts to exploit
Correct.
CVEs or something, right?
Right.
Now this is coming towards phishing as well at this point, because a
Right.
lot of
The
this can
lowered
be,
bar for entry.
bar has gone down a lot. Like,
Correct.
how I was talking about, I was an intern, took me a month to just wrap my head around all of this and then implement it in the field, right? And the client I
Yes.
was dealing with was a Fortune 500 company with, they had some serious defenses, and it was, I believe it was against G Suite as well.
Correct.
So
Yes.
yeah, like it's just the iterations, like number of iterations as they keep improving, you will always be getting more efficient in the workflow.
Right. Right.
So yeah, it
Great.
is a dangerous time for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've done a great job at scaring people who are listening to this podcast. I think they're already going to check their emails right after the podcast, or maybe have even left midway to be able to check their spam folder. So
Yeah,
thanks to
for
that, by
sure.
the way. That's some great insights. A couple of points that I really liked is, you're right in the sense that when companies get phishing engagements done, they are not just assessing that whether or not it's a compromise through phishing, right? It's not just whether or not somebody clicked a malware, somebody gave any credentials. It's also to find out what percentage of people are vulnerable to clicking and where they can prioritize their security awareness efforts towards. Secondly,
Yes,
they can
yes,
gauge their password security strength, and if there are any kind of guessable passwords, insecure passwords, weak passwords that are being used
yeah,
in the enterprise, that's also something that can be caught. And thirdly, I think the technical defenses that get breached in the part of the phishing engagement. So yeah, it's not just whether or not somebody submitted a credential or not, or somebody clicked on a malware and an RC came through, and that's particularly for the phishing engagements objectives. Now, so that we spoke a lot about the kind of things that are happening in the wild to people, and how email security concerns not just enterprises but even for every person out there, right? Even kids who are having their mobiles are vulnerable to these kind of things.
yes.
So what can they do about this? What kind of measures can common people take, firstly, to stay secure on the email front? And then let's come to what kind of technical measures enterprises can take to up their game from email security.
Yeah, yeah, and that's thanks for bringing it up. Because this is really the most important part of this, right? Because at
Right.
the end of the day, phishing is a social engineering technique, and the weakest link that's being targeted is the human in the chain,
Hmm.
right? So it's really important to look at telltale signs that you're being phished. But luckily for all of us, it's not that complicated on a human level, right?
Hmm.
So, how, I mean, most companies have their DNS quite sorted. So, I mean, it's highly unlikely that you'll find an email spoofing vulnerability. And I mean, if you do, it's a huge risk, because
Right.
then there is really no real way of figuring out if this was a legitimate email for a
Hmm.
user, because it's going to have
Correct.
your company's domain on that.
Sources. Correct.
Yeah,
Hmm.
sources, right? So, for a layman, like for somebody, even children in school,
Hmm.
what you need to look at is the from address. It's that simple. Look at the from address, look at the context of the email, and check, is this person who he says key is, right?
Hmm.
So the domain name can never be. So for example, if you're getting an email from Google, right? The email is gonna be at the rate google.com, right?
Right.
Anybody trying to pretend to be sending emails from Google can never get that email address. They will never have at the rate google.com,
Correct.
right? So
Correct.
they can only have a different version of it where maybe they say auth-google.com or
Or
something like
g00gul.com.
yeah, or G00, yeah, doing that, or even they. I think a lot of people also use. Uh, I, I think it's a different language, right? Is it called Cyrillic? Yeah, Cyrillic characters, I believe,
Right.
which
Right.
look like English alphabets, but
Yes.
they're actually a different character in itself. So
Yes.
it's no longer
Yes.
so. You can have an O in a which is not the same representation on the system level, so you
Yes.
have a it look the same, but it's not the same, right?
Yes. Yes. Correct.
So,
Its
so
ASCII character representation is different.
ASCII representation is different for that. Yeah.
Right.
So again, the idea is look at the from address and read the email. And obviously, if you've never received an email from this person,
Hmm.
always be wary of clicking a link. The main goal happens to be one, either getting your password
Hmm.
or two, trying to get remote code execution on your system,
Hmm.
which they could do through an attachment that you download and suddenly they have a reverse shell going or something
Hmm.
like that, right?
Hmm.
So as long like ideally do not click the link, never click the link, right? And especially for organizations, it will tell you, your email will tell you that this is coming from an external mail,
Correct.
right?
Yes. Yes.
So you have to be very cognizant of that fact and be very careful if you're clicking on something or
Hmm.
you're downloading something. Always double check the from address,
Right.
right?
And
That's
that is, it makes sense, right? Because in any phishing email, the whole objective is to make the user do something, right? Because
yes,
our phisher can get as advanced as possible, do all the high-end tech things. But
correct.
if there is no interaction from the victim on that email, then
Then it
it's
doesn't
as
matter.
good as a waste, right? So
Yeah, it doesn't
we have
matter.
to be very cognizant, like you said, on what kind of links we click on, or if we are even
Yes,
doing any sort of interaction that leads to us transferring to a web page or a browser.
correct, correct. Yeah,
Hmm.
and the other thing is because if it is somebody trying to get your password, at
Hmm.
least you go to a page and then it asks you for a password, and then there's a second indication of it would be a phishing page, right? Looking at
Correct.
the web page, because not every web page looks good. Like it can, there are again telltale signs that this is probably a phishing page.
Right.
But just clicking the link could do a lot of things. Like if
Hmm.
it's not looking for your password, maybe it's a 0-day exploit they've sent you, and maybe it's a sandbox escape on your browser, right?
Hmm.
And that link is what triggers it. So the moment you click it, you're already boned. Yeah, at that
Correct.
point. So
Hmm.
so that's why my point is, if you see an email in your inbox that you're not familiar with, that
Hmm.
you look at this the from address and you've never received this email before, or this is something that already, because there are always signs, right?
Yeah.
And you always look at the from address and then be cautious whether you should click the link or not, because just clicking the link could be bad enough, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So it is very important to look at that from address. Now,
Correct.
if you're more tech savvy, I would recommend you look at email headers as well, right? So the moment you're looking at email headers, you just have more information based on which you can make that judgment, right? Now,
Right.
obviously,
Yes.
there's a from address, but
Hmm.
there's this field called return path,
Hmm.
where there's an email address specified in the return path that essentially redirects all the failed messages to that email address, which will be attacker
Okay.
controlled, right? Look at the
Hmm.
domain for that as well. A lot of times, what happens is the return path will be of maybe a C2 server or like a domain for the C2 server, and the attacker was essentially using something else to deliver. So, for example, within G Suite, you can add people to Google Docs, like people you don't know, you can add them, and then Google will send an email uh, to that user, and
Hmm.
then in that particular email, the attacker has the option to customize 2 or 3 lines, and that's enough, honestly. Because in
Okay.
this case,
Okay.
you're getting an email from a trusted source, right? Google
Hmm.
is sending you this email. But the moment you click on anything within that message, you again don't know, right?
Hmm.
So that becomes tricky. So
Right.
that's one thing. You can also look at the received parameter, which will show you the hops that the email took, right? So you'll be able to
Correct.
see the source IP address,
Hmm.
and again, you can also see the source IP address from the X originating IP header. Okay, so that will be the exact mail server that sent you the mail. Like
Hmm.
your mailbox received from this particular IP, and the received header will have the trail of all the IP addresses that the email message has followed to come to your inbox, right?
Okay. Hmm.
So if you keep an eye out on just these three, right?
Hmm.
I mean, four in total, like the from address, the return path, the received header, X originating IP header. If you keep an
Correct.
eye on that, just looking at that will be enough to figure out if it's a phishing email,
Okay.
if it ends up
And
in your inbox, right?
right.
Ideally, it
Right.
shouldn't end up in your inbox. And we as security professionals need to do a better job in making sure they don't end up in
Yeah.
the inbox. But as things stand, it is happening, and this is what on a human level, this is what we can do to protect ourselves against it.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. Lovely. So, thank you very much, Siddharth. I think these are some very good pointers, even for just people who are very new to email security, as well as for people who have very busy schedules to, have concerns about cybersecurity in general, right? So,
Yes.
thank you very much for these points, and I'm sure it's going to be very valuable when people follow these points, and they're going to be having a much safer and secure experience in using their emails. So that brings us to the end of the podcast. And I just want to ask one thing, is that in your experience, um, clicking a link, has it directly downloaded any malware? And if so, what kind of an indication is on the screen? Because if it is a website mimicking, then your browser opens and there is a page which asks for
Yeah.
credentials. But uh, is there a command prompt that opens up when a malware is being downloaded due to clicking of link?
So again, if you have decent antivirus on your endpoint or an EDR, it's very hard. Like you would have to have a really complicated chain of vulnerabilities to be able to do that. But having said that, I mean, this is again long back. I'm talking Sans 2021. That is when
Mm-hmm.
at least it was working, right? So I had done this in a red team where we were trying to get a reverse shell because we needed to get into the internal network.
Right.
So what we had done was we created this Excel document and
Mm-hmm.
had VBA macros in it, right?
Right.
So again, so now here the key thing is the user can download this file.
Hmm.
Downloading this file is not going to do anything.
Hmm.
It's only when you open the file and enable the macros is when things are going to start happening, right? And in this
Right.
particular case, the malware that we had developed,
Hmm.
it would the VBA script would essentially have the user's permission to it. So it's just a process being started by the user. He just
Hmm.
doesn't know it because we
It's
had
all
like
in the background.
it's all in the background. We had an image
Okay.
and we said, okay, if you want to see the details inside, like enable the macros and then it'll come out. And then it did come out, except all they could see was what they wanted to see. But the
Right.
moment
Right.
we enable the macros, we had a reverse shell going, right?
Right.
So
Right.
so in that case, like again, no command prompts will come up
Hmm.
to you. You will
Hmm.
not know because in this scenario that I described, it's as good as me as a user opening an application. Like I open Google, double click on Google Chrome. That is the action that has happened. But the moment you
Okay.
enable macro, it just started a
Hmm.
process. The process was in the background. And that
Correct.
particular process, what it did was it downloaded another payload from our C2 server and executed that, which gave me the reversion.
Right.
So
Right. Right.
yeah, so
And
and
organizations should actually then start considering as to which groups in their organization really need macros enabled, right?
exactly,
Because
yeah,
enabling macros itself is a security concern.
exactly. That's true. Yeah. So
Right.
yeah, policies go a long way for sure. However,
Hmm.
like, see, this is still a very rudimentary exploit, I'd say. Like, for example, if I had a 0 day in my bag,
Hmm.
I mean, honestly, the moment you click that link, it's
Hmm.
probably, so let's say it's a Chrome exploit, for example, and you're accessing
Hmm.
email through Chrome. The moment you click on that link, the payload is going to be such that it's going to escape your browser sandbox
Hmm.
and then execute a process with your system, right? And it'll
Hmm.
depend on the vulnerability. And those kind of bugs, there's not much you can do if you don't have EDRs running. Because, like, this is because if it's a 0 day, then you're looking at anomalies, right? And if you
Right.
don't have
Right.
anomaly detection in place, then it's very hard to catch that. Because, and
Yep.
the other thing is you can also look at, network traffic. There's a lot of ways to block it, obviously.
Hmm.
If you have enough tooling. In fact, you don't really need a lot of machine learning or AI to pick that up. If you
Hmm.
have, because in this case, you know what you're looking for, right? It'll be maybe it's a web request from the internal network to the outside network. So you want to be monitoring these alerts, right? And
Right.
in fact, in my current role as a purple teamer, I do a lot of the detection response side of things as well. And
Hmm.
in the last 6 months, we've been bombarded with phishing attacks, but none of them have been
Of course.
successful because we are able to pick up on all of these little things, and then they always get quarantined. So yeah, there's that.
Lovely. Brilliant. Okay, all right. So thank you, Siddharth, for your insights. I'm sure it's going to be very helpful for anyone who has concerns about email security, and I hope they can get in touch with you to discuss more things on email security. So that is it, friends, for this episode. And if you have any thoughts regarding email security discussions, please feel free to put your thoughts in the comments section. And until next time, stay safe, stay secure, and you know the drill. So like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.